Well, it's April 26th, 2016. It's cold and chilly outside, but it's hot in here. We've got some really important things that we want to discuss. I'd like to introduce, first of all, our guest, Natalie Ringsmuth from Unitecloud. Of course, Robin is here with us as always, and I'm Theresa Skorseth, and this is Can We Talk? Well, can we talk, Natalie?
Yes, I love to talk. I'm all about conversation.
Good. Tell us about Unitecloud. Let's start there.
Sure. Unitecloud was started about a year ago now, and it was started as a blog, and it's turned into a movement, basically, in central Minnesota. And we are really desiring to quell the cultural tensions that exist in St. Cloud, but also around central Minnesota. So resolve cultural tension and restore dignity to the area. We don't want to be embarrassed to be from St. Cloud area anymore, so we're trying to solve that one conversation at a time. And we do that through education and actionable steps. Right now we're specifically working on amplifying community voices, especially those that are marginalized, and also building up leaders in community intervention. And an example of community intervention is what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay. Well, we have got a situation in Little Falls, a sort of systemic Islamophobia, and we really we need to find a way to address that. We have a family who's moved into town, a Muslim family. They registered, they have 5 children, am I right about that? 7. Registered their children at school, and that was the first poke above the horizon that anybody saw from them. But it's right away people started talking about it and wondering if they're going to blow us up in our beds while we sleep. So we need to figure out if there's any way we can help this family to feel welcome. If it isn't too late, there was an editorial from the editor of the Morrison County Record last Saturday, and Tom West, thank you, Rob, in which he was talking about the fact that the superintendent, help me here, Robin, because I'm not sure what the whole backstory is, but the superintendent of the school.
It's in here.
Yeah.
Stephen Jones went on the radio to field calls. It starts right here.
Stephen Jones, the superintendent of the school, went on the radio to field calls from citizens about this family. Now, this family's done nothing but move in and register their children. And Tom says, I understand the concern. Fear of Muslims isn't just in Little Falls, it's throughout central Minnesota and beyond. The reason for the fear is also clear. The news media has been full of stories of Muslim attacks on Western civilian populations. A Muslim soldier opens fire on fellow GIs at Fort Hood. 2 Muslim brothers set off bombs at the Boston Marathon. A Muslim couple massacred co-workers of the husband at a holiday party in San Bernardino. And will anyone ever forget where they were when they first heard of the 9/11 attacks? Throw in continuing attacks in Europe and videos of beheadings in the Middle East, and the fear is understandable. It's made worse in Minnesota because of the reports about 24 young Somali men having left the Twin Cities area to fight for ISIS. And another 10 have either pled guilty to or facing trial for attempting to do so. So he goes on and talks about that for a moment. Then he says, but others are not. So they refer to all of these developments as Islamophobia, as if any thinking American should have no concern. As if any thinking American should have no concern. But others are not buying it. All of these events have caused harm to the futures of Muslims, and in Minnesota to Somalis in particular, even though Somalis have been in the state for more than 20 years. The Central Minnesota Tea Party patriots have been bringing in speakers on a regular basis who have stoked those fears, connecting the dots, so to speak, to show that socialists, communists, and Muslims are all involved in a vast conspiracy to bring down the republic. I don't doubt that some people would be happy to destroy this nation, but I also believe that it has always been so. The country hasn't fallen yet in spite of suffering through a civil war and the Great Depression, because most Americans still believe that they are extremely lucky to have been born in this great nation. They see the poor souls in third world hellholes, and many Americans still think, there but for the grace of God go I. Thank you, Lord. And that brings me back to one single Somali family moving to Little Falls. For more than a year, the rumor has been flying around town that up to 1,000 Somalis are moving to Little Falls. This week the number was 41. The newspapers checked repeatedly with city and county authorities, the people who would know, And our conclusion is that it just isn't true. We don't have 1,000 jobs available, and we don't have 200 vacant apartments. Every apartment that is under construction has reflamed the rumors, even though the newest apartments usually bring the highest rents. It just doesn't make sense. So that's a nutshell explanation of what's been going on here.
Can I inject something? This may be, we don't know for sure, but this may be the first Somali Muslim family, but certainly not the first Muslim family in this area.
In this area, no, it's true.
There wasn't a big hoopla when my neighbor, as a matter of fact, was moved here and is a prominent businessman. I don't understand.
And they're originally from Pakistan.
Palestine.
Palestine, that's what I meant to say, for
Yeah.
Palestine. But
Well,
you
he
know,
is. His wife is from Jordan,
I think, yeah.
But there wasn't the same hoopla. And they've been living in this area and successfully running 3 businesses, I believe it is, for a number of years.
Mm.
So it depends on, I guess, if you're a dark-skinned Muslim or a light-skinned Muslim.
And if the women in the family wear a hijab
Right.
or not, because in
Right.
the case of the Palestinian family who've assimilated here very nicely, there's no physical distinguishing characteristic.
Well,
There's no
and we have a
costume.
doctor, a prominent doctor that practices at our hospital, sometimes in the emergency room. In fact, you have had him for a physician at one time. I was with you.
Okay.
And his daughter insists on wearing a hijab, living in St. Cloud, and was at the St. Cloud University, was one of those women wearing the hijab, explaining about hijabs and head coverings, because she's proud of the fact that she's Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a wide variety of differences. We have many, many different ethnicity doctors in this,
And dentists.
at this,
And
right.
my doctors, my
in our
doctors
area.
also.
And there's just so much to talk about. I'm going to let you talk about why you wrote this and give us a little background information about this.
Sure. So I actually got a couple emails and a couple messages through social media about Ron Branstner coming to town on Friday. Also about Tom West's article. And what concerned me, I used to be an educator. I have my degree in music education. I taught University of Atlanta for many years before I had kids. And what really concerned me was, why is this news?
Exactly.
It brought me back to what I believe the 1950s might have been like, when an all-white town has one black family that moves in, and the news is that the black family has moved to town. Why is it news that a Somali Muslim family moves to town and takes the right of education that their kids have because they're here in America to go to school? And why is that news? I don't understand that. And then for all of the hoopla that is around that, then for Ron to come speak here on Friday is very concerning to me.
What do we know about this Ron?
I have been to a couple of Ron's talks.
Okay.
Actually, Haji and I. So Haji is my business partner at Unitecloud. He is a Somali American man. He runs a couple businesses in St. Cloud. He graduated from St. Cloud State University. He is an American citizen. So the one that he and I went to together was in a Christian church in St. Cloud area. And during that talk, Ron was talking for a long time about refugees, and he believes that refugees are a burden, too much of a burden on our system, and that people are really, specifically nonprofits, are just rolling in the dough because of refugees. And so he is just really concerned about that, but then more than just anti-refugee, which I call that type of talk, he is also anti-Muslim, as are many people that attend his talks, and they really talk about how, well, I think in the Star Tribune, can't remember who wrote that. I know that person's name too, but anyway, he wrote about how Ron said, and what do Muslims want? And then everyone said, Sharia law. Like, everybody believes that Muslims are all bad, believes that Muslims are here to enact Sharia law and then eventually kill all non-Muslims. But what happened there when we were at that talk is that Haji was correcting Ron on a few of the things he was saying about the Quran and about some hadiths, because Haji is Muslim, so he knows more about that than I do for sure, and also Ron. So when he was corrected, then Ron said, I don't know as much as you do probably about the Quran, so okay, and he kind of backpedaled. Well, during that time when Haji was talking, then the people in the church were yelling at Haji to assimilate, muttering under their breath, swearing at Haji, and this made Haji feel very uncomfortable for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And this was his first time being in a church in central Minnesota.
And that was the Baptist church, right?
And this was a Baptist church, yes.
In St. Cloud.
Yep. And so these are the types of talks that Ron gives quite a lot. And I don't know if this is the type of talk he'll give, on Friday, but his talks are filled with a lot of statistics and claiming some conspiracy theories. And what's interesting about Ron is that Ron is not a bad guy. Like, he's never been disrespectful to me or disrespectful to Haji. In fact, when Haji was being yelled at by people in his audience, he stood up for Haji and he said, no, this is not how we're going to act. And so, enter in this letter to where I actually emailed this to Ron, because he and I have emailed on a pretty regular basis. And what I'm asking him to understand is that his talk is not the problem, but his talk is going to fan the flames of the problem, which right now has to do with 7 children. And what we've seen in St. Cloud that has happened because of these types of talks is parents of children in the school district go to these talks. They come home and they talk about the talk, which, that's what my husband and I do. And my 11, 9, and 6-year-olds know exactly what we're talking about, even if we try to talk in code. Right. And then they take that information and they're like, well, Mom and Dad said that, so that must be true, because they're still young enough mostly to believe that. And then they go to school and, that's their truth. So if the truth that is learned is that Muslims are allowed to get us, and then a child understands that from their parents and then goes to school, there's going to be an instance of bullying.
Right.
And that is why...
or worse.
Or worse. And that is what I'm concerned with here, and I'm telling him that far be it from him to come and give this talk to the point where something happens in a violent nature or a bullying nature to these children.
Yes.
We have met Ozma Jama. I don't know if you know her, but she is the woman in Coon Rapids that was hit across the face with a beer mug for speaking Swahili.
Yes.
And she had 4 children with her at that time, 4 of her nephews and nieces, and around my kid's age. And they don't want to go out to eat anymore. They hid under the table while this altercation was happening. And they came here from a war-torn country for peace and safety, and now they're afraid to go to Applebee's. Because maybe somebody might hit my aunt again.
Right.
So this is the reality that we live in, where it's not something made up that there's not going to be any violence because of this Islamophobia. There already is. Think about the Somali restaurant in Grand Forks that was firebombed to the tune of $90,000. That was right after an anti-Islamic speaker was in town there.
Do you think the Somalis are being targeted for any particular reason beyond the fact that they're the ones who we see in central Minnesota? We have a large Somali influx here of recent years. So do you think that's it, or is there something about being Somali that's worse than being Palestinian in people's eyes?
It does seem that, I think it's sheer quantity, like you're talking about.
Yeah, we have the largest Somali population in the United States, don't we?
Yes, in Minneapolis we do, and St. Cloud is 3rd.
Right.
So,
well, we also have the largest Hmong community, and I have many Hmong friends, and they don't experience this kind of stuff. I know, I was with them recently, and they've experienced racism, but not like this.
Well, and we did have a large Hmong community when I was growing up in the St. Cloud area, and in fact I was talking to a Hmong man who still lives in St. Cloud, and he said to me, this isn't any different, the Somali issue isn't any different than when this happened to my family and my people, my Hmong people. And the difference is now most of the Hmong people have left because they could not survive and thrive in central Minnesota, so they've gone to the cities.
Right.
This is what people like Ron and people in this area really, I think, want to have happen. They want to drive away our diversity, and they want it to go back to what it used to be. It's a whole make America great again type of a mentality, right?
And yet, Ron Ranster claims to be a Christian.
Yes, and this is where the rubber meets the road, because when I have a blog out there right now talking about how there's a St. Cloud city councilman that came, it's long story short, is there's a bill right now in the House and the Senate to audit all of refugee resettlement spending at a federal, state, local, and nonprofit level. It is, according to other legislators I've talked to, not a well-written bill. There is no talks about what the costs are going to be. There's no talks to how it's even going to get done. It's basically a bill that's put out there that is based in fear. So just last week, the Stearns County Commissioners Board passed a resolution saying, yes, we love this bill, go forth and conquer, type of a thing. And Haji and I were there to speak against it. What happened was, after we left that meeting, we were met by a group of people that are kind of more in Ron's camp. But they don't act like Ron. They're not respectful like Ron are. Like Ron is. We stepped out of that meeting, and immediately there was a confrontation. And they're saying, get out of here. We don't want anything to do with you. I'm like, this is a public building, so I don't really have to leave. But, you know, these same women that are yelling at me and men are the same women and men that have yelled at Haji in the past that he's going to blow up everybody in St. Cloud because he's a Muslim.
And I wonder how many are from Little Falls in that group. I bet there are some.
A lot of those people are, you know, St. Cloud residents that I know, but there is some sort of a group that is really well-funded, number one, and well-organized to be going around to central Minnesota and beyond to do these talks and to spread this misinformation and fear. And really, it doesn't make any sense when I read the Bible and when I hear the verse that that true love drives out fear. And true love to me is God. That's what God is to me. That's what Jesus did for us. You know, and that we have the Holy Spirit to really discern what we're supposed to do with the fact that God is love. And to show that to our neighbors. And when we have things like this happening, that is what's confusing to me, and why I have gone to Ron's meetings and stood up in front of 200 plus people saying, what are we doing here? We are Christians. You know, what would Jesus do when he is here? I would say, please, will you take a minute and pray and really ask yourself what you should be doing. And to that, it was like I was on the stage of the Apollo. It was like, boo, get out, get out. You know, I mean, it's really, we were met with just like, I can't believe you're doing this, and in fact, you must be an undercover Muslim. Obviously, you're not a Christian.
So that's a great example then of cognitive dissonance.
Yes, it is.
You know,
loving one truth and speaking another, or
Martin
either
Luther
holding
King.
a certain philosophy but not acting on it. I'm sorry,
Right.
Nancy.
Martin Luther King rightfully said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And my Living Bible, Proverbs 31:8 reads, "You should defend those who cannot help themselves. Yes, speak up for those poor and needy, and see that they get justice." My Living Bible also reads, and this is in Matthew 6:43. There's a saying, love your friends and hate your enemies. But I say, love your enemies. This is red letter. This is what Christ taught, folks. This is not me saying this. This is not an apostle or someone representing Christ. This is he himself. Pray for those who persecute you. Love your enemies. In that way, you will be acting as true sons of your Father in heaven, for he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust too. If you love only those who love you, what good is that? Even scoundrels do that much. If you are friendly only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even the heathen do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. And one of the most important scriptures, I think, in this entire book is Philippians 2:3. Don't be selfish. Don't live to make a good impression on others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself. Not treat your neighbor like you want to be treated. Not as the Ten Commandments says, do unto others as you would do unto yourself. This says more. Let me read that last sentence to you. Be humble, thinking of yourselves as better than yourself.
Thinking of
So-
others is better than yourself.
Thinking of others is better than yourself. So how is Ron Bransner thinking of others better than himself?
I think what the root of this here is uncomfortableness. You know, it's for so long in central Minnesota we were all white, right? I mean, I grew up in Sauk Rapids. Everybody there was white. You know, that's just the way that it was back in the 80s and 90s. It's uncomfortable to have people here that don't look like us, don't talk like us, don't practice the same religion as us. But we are not called in this book to be comfortable.
That's right.
And that is one thing that is very concerning to me about the Christian church in general, is that when something isn't comfortable, then it must be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's how Jesus lived his life, he wouldn't have done anything that he did, that you're reading about here. And when we think of people as better than ourselves, that is uncomfortable. It is more comfortable to sit down and watch Netflix and, you know, eat ice cream and not worry about the outside world. I have said so many times in the past couple months, I wish I could unlearn things that I now know.
Yeah.
Because now that I know, I have to act.
Mm-hmm.
And acting on this stuff
It's harder.
has taken over my life.
Right. It's much harder than ignoring it.
Yes,
Sitting on the
but
couch.
as it should take over my life.
Mm-hmm.
It should even take over my kids' lives to the point where
Yes.
they're mini activists in their own school.
Because if we don't, who will?
Right. And far be it from me to meet God at the end of my life and for him to say, hey, I sent people to you to serve,
Right.
and instead you're on the couch watching Netflix. I mean,
Right.
you know,
Right.
not that Netflix is horrible because, hey, I was just watching it last night. But you know what I mean? Like that, we have to step out of our comfort zones and into the path that God has laid out for us. And right now in central Minnesota, that includes living with people who are not like us.
Well, we need to understand that this is simply justice. It's not that we're trying to give them a fairer shake than we've had. We're just trying to bring them up to a certain acceptable human level. I just read something recently. This was from the Black Lives Matter people. You know, people lately, white people especially, have been saying all lives matter as if somehow that makes,
It's embarrassing.
makes sense.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and I'm going to paraphrase what I read, a black person wrote, you may, as a white person, be having a hard time, I don't doubt that, but you're not having a hard time because you're white.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the difference.
And all lives aren't being gunned down in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Minorities are being gunned down in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily African American minority folks. At this moment.
And to get back to the local situation, I would be afraid if I were in that family.
Yeah, I
in the
fear for
Muslim
them.
family
Yes.
in Little Falls, I do too.
Yep.
I
These
saw
people are
this
just-
a little girl on the bus at Lincoln School, and I smiled at her. She was wearing a hijab, and I made the heart sign to her, the best I could remember how to do it, with my fingers like that. And I pointed to her hijab, and I said, love it, love it. She heard me, and she smiled.
Mm-hmm.
Rob and I
We-
talked about this before. We both would like to wear a hijab.
Well, you did, as a matter of fact.
Well, I
You
did once, yes,
to one of
but-
the city council meetings.
You know, we have, if you go on our blog right before this one, there, one of my friends from church lives in an area that is heavily populated by East Africans in St. Cloud in an apartment complex. And she has a blog that she wrote talking about how when she became friends with this mom next door, she then was given a hijab and an abaya, and there's a picture of her on that, in that. And so, I mean, she's a Christian. She's a very devout Christian, a very even conservative Christian.
Mhm.
And she sees the gift of a hijab from her Muslim neighbor as something that, you know, this Muslim family couldn't, they probably couldn't really afford to do that. I mean, this is extra. Just like, not because they're a poor Muslim family, but just because who has extra stuff?
Well, yeah.
Nobody. So hardly anybody anyway, 1%.
Yeah, 1%.
Yeah, but you know, people would look at her as a Christian wearing a hijab, and we've seen that in the news, and say, how dare you? You know, how dare you? And what I point them to is the Bible, because if you read what Paul says, we
women's
all
heads
should be covered, you know, I mean, the Muslims are actually doing a better job at following our New Testament, and we should cover our heads according to
That's
what Paul
why the
says.
nuns are wearing a head cover, many of them, and some not anymore. But, you know, it's Catholics, it's Jewish folks. You know, when you go into a synagogue in the Twin Cities, they offer you one, and you can't go in without a head cover. The one I went to years ago.
It used to be the same way with Catholics, they would offer you a little.
Yeah, a little
Hanky
lace
to put
thing.
on, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And yet, you know, it's a big deal because it's a different kind of a head covering.
Yeah.
You know, when I wore my American flag handkerchief that I bought at Coburn Superstore, people thought it was disrespectful because I was wearing an American flag. It was just a handkerchief, folks, that looked like an American flag. And I wore it for a reason, and that was, could have been considered a hijab in the sense that it covered my entire head. Not even part of my face, but it covered all my hair.
Yes.
And I had tied it up here like a little bandana. But I was criticized for that too, that was unpatriotic. You're right.
But it really it shows us that we're forgetting our history.
Yeah.
And it shows us that we're forgetting our own religion. And that's when it comes to the fact of, you know, Ron and I can both say that we're Christians. We practice it differently. And I don't think it is right of Christians to tell other Christians you're not a real Christian. There's nobody's, that's
Only
not,
God knows, yeah.
That's not up to you to decide. But I think we're forgetting to look at our own religion. We're forgetting to look at our own Bible. We're forgetting to look at the things we don't practice that maybe we should be practicing, to know that if you are going to bring the Quran out and say, hey, right here it says that all Muslims are supposed to kill all non-Muslims, you need to look at your own Bible and you need to read the Old Testament, where it talks about God telling Moses to kill the Midianites, children and women, and grapple with your own violence in your own book before you grapple with somebody else's holy book.
Exactly.
Religion is a history of violence.
Christians are in no position to be criticizing another faith because there's some, I'm going to say something on the line that's not a swear word, but it's close, some crap. Because that's clearly was a smack talk in the Old Testament. Nobody would think of doing something that violates our laws now that's in our Christian Bible. Would they? Would they stone an adulterer, man or woman? Would they stone a homosexual? Yeah, if they did, they'd be in jail.
Right. Hopefully.
Now, something that folks, I have so much information here, we're not going to give it all to it. We might need to do 2 hours on just this and forget about it.
I mean, really? We could talk so long.
A 2005 report, this is from the Southern Poverty Law Center, it's fresh. A 2005 report from the FBI, in fact, concludes that terror from the right is the most dangerous and prolific. Why aren't we, if we're concerned about fearing people who are going to create extremist acts, terroristic acts, why aren't we fearing people in the Christian church? Because that's where they're coming from.
Yeah, the Ku Klux Klan is
The bombing in Oklahoma
was
a Christian guy.
Exactly. So many more terrorist acts have been committed by people who are not identifying as Muslim.
Exactly. And this is a long article on that with a lot of stats. We won't go into that because we don't have time. Interesting.
Well, did you know what the ADL actually also says, which I did not know, is that 70% or 67%, I can't remember, I don't think it's in here, but of acts against someone because of their religion is because of Jews, is done to Jews.
It's anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semitic. Isn't that, that's interesting to me, because in this area, that's not what we see.
Yeah.
But we need to understand our history again to know that there is still an anti-Semitic group in our nation. This anti-Semitism, is that a word? Breeds right into anti-Islamic ways. Semitism. Oh my gosh.
And this says, the reports make a number of interesting points. This is titled Terror's Measure, if you should want to look it up on Southern Poverty Law Center. Terror's Measure. Most tips to law enforcement about homegrown jihadists come from American Muslim families, one said. Another focused on the fact that not all Muslims in this country come from Middle Eastern countries. A number involved in terroristic plots are black, white, or Latino citizens who converted to Islam. Overall, the study seemed to indicate that homegrown jihadist terrorism has been significantly less deadly than other forms of domestic terrorism, in particular that from the radical right. Now, because Prince died this week, and I wasn't aware of this until I've been searching the internet on some things, and for a reason that I'll talk about in another show because it's long and detailed. Prince was truly a symbol for revolution, a true activist who called for change and fought for justice both on and off the microphone. His activism spanned decades as he took on numerous social issues like police brutality, the discrimination against race and class, global hunger, and the dreadful repercussions of war. I wonder if he'd be hated here for speaking out against racial prejudice.
Another person who just did that was Bono from U2. He
He's been an activist forever.
Yes, and he just sent a message to Willow Creek Church, which is, there are a number of churches in the United States, but he specifically talked about many Bible verses, but he talked about welcoming the stranger.
Mhm.
And he said, the Bible verse which says, welcome the, is it the stranger, or welcome the alien, basically the foreign person.
The foreigner.
Yeah, welcome the foreigner
Right.
into your midst and treat them just as if they were your own.
Right.
And that's for today,
And people
people.
have been struggling with that
Exactly.
since Moses.
Right.
You know,
Yes,
they have.
new under the
It's-
sun.
Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. It's interesting, Natalie, you were talking about knowing our history.
Mhm.
And then at another point, you were talking about anti-Semitism and how we're protected from that here because there are so few Jews and such a low profile Jewish population. But I think you've got a point. We need to see ourselves as part of history and as part of the big picture,
Mhm.
not just one isolated little town that time forgot, because time has not forgotten us, and we don't get to live in a different plane of existence from the rest of the world. We simply cannot.
Mhm.
And the sooner we realize that and get busy taking care of one another, inclusively, all inclusively, the better off we'll be. I'm sorry, little rant there. I'm done.
Thanks, Rob. That was great.
I want to inject something here because I just gave Chris to play on Wednesdays at what time, Chris?
Around 3.
Around 3 o'clock, there's going to be a program that I filmed. I went down on Sunday to film an event called, or was it Saturday? But the 24th, whichever day, I forget now because I've been so busy the last 3 days. It was called We Are One Minnesota.
Mhm.
And it was Senator Klobuchar opened the meeting. She was the first speaker, and Mark Dayton is in support of this, and Al Franken sent a letter. The Human Rights Commissioner was there. There is a big movement to combat this, all of these Islamophobic, hate, warmonger, intolerant type speakers. And I asked that commissioner to please put Little Falls first on the docket when they come to Greater Minnesota. They realized, in fact, it talks about in the beginning, how that they really shouldn't have the meeting in the metro because the problems aren't in the metro, they're in Greater Minnesota, so-called Greater Minnesota. I challenge that phrase. I challenge the kindness campaign that's going on here in Morrison County.
It's pretty
This
simple.
is the most unkind, unwelcoming, intolerant area that I've ever lived in. And I would never say that if it weren't the truth. This kindness campaign is in conjunction with, I believe, the Live Longer, Live Better movement here in town, which is connected to our hospital. And the audacity of all of this stuff brewing underneath and the hate spreading and the fear mongering going on is outrageous. There's just no other way to say it. I met this gentleman whose name is Michael Hinden. He's a Jew from the St. Louis Park area, and he handed me some information. And I'm going to read a little bit of what he has written. I'm also going to let you know that I spoke with somebody from the American Refugee Committee, picked up some of their information. And be forewarned, Ron Bransner, Bridget Gabriel, John Guandolo, who's the other, the Duke guy or whatever his last
Oh, Duke, yeah. I can't remember his first name.
or something like that.
Mhm.
You may face challenges when you speak from here on. I think you've pricked a beehive amongst a number of people, and sometimes there's a sting, and I'm not saying that as a threat. I'm suggesting to you, because you will probably be listening to this, that you are going to face some pushback from some decent law-abiding citizens who are very concerned for the safety of their Muslim friends. And at every opportunity I get, I'm gonna be putting a lot of my effort into this.
And I think that's what we have to say to Little Falls and to St. Cloud and to Greater Minnesota in general, is that that indifference at this time is acceptance. And that's what one thing we preach when we go to St. Cloud State and churches in the area, is that, you know, maybe there was a time when indifference was kind of whatever, but at this time, with this national conversation, with the speaking circuit we have that is anti-Muslim, you have no choice of indifference, especially if you're a Christian, in my opinion. But we have to be careful with the way that we do it. And this is what I tell my Unitecloud people, because there are Unitecloud people that are very angry. I am angry. But I know that if I go to Ron's talk in anger and yell at Ron, not that I think you're suggesting that, but just so people understand that the way you go there is just as important as going there.
Oh, absolutely.
So what I tell people is, if you're so angry that you're not going to be able to control yourself, don't go yet.
Great.
You know, pray, meditate, ask the Lord for some help, whatever you need to do to
Right.
get to that point.
Right.
But I think you're saying indifference is acceptance at this point as well, because we have to act, but we have to act in a way that's going to give us longevity.
Yep, absolutely. This
And
gal
so-
that I spoke
And
with
hope,
at the American Refugee Committee's name is Vanessa. I believe that was who I was speaking with. And I picked up her information here. So I'm going to be asking them to come here. And I'm going to be asking IRG, the Islamic Resource Group, a new group that I met down there, to come here, to speak here. And the Human Rights Commissioner has been asked by me to bring this Traveling on the Road show, We Are One Minnesota, to come here. So there will be some facts and information shared to counter what you, Rand Branster, and all of you, like my neighbor Fred and Kathy Fessler, and Greg Smith, another local. I am in this now, and I believe Theresa's in this, and so are other people that are with our groups that from time to time call actions about a number of important things. So here is what Michael Hinden has written. Thank you for giving us part of your Sunday. This is Dear Minnesota Legislators, he writes, and this is February 28th, 2016. I'm writing in honor of my immigrant parents who arrived a century ago impoverished and English illiterate. This is how most of us came to America and Minnesota. It grieves me that people have forgotten their ancestors' immigration stories, are unkind and willing to dismiss the tremendous contributions early and new immigrants make to our community. Frankly, no one questions when my neighborhood asks for a new playground. It's assumed we pay taxes. The next time an immigrant or minority community asks that funds be allocated to a specific community need, you will be able to say with confidence this allocation is part of that community's tax contribution. The facts are at your fingertips. Dr. Bruce Corey of Concordia University is well known for his work assembling data showing the vast economic contributions of immigrants and minorities groups in Minnesota. Here are some quick facts from the economic contribution of immigrants to Minnesota. Immigrants pay property taxes, sales tax, and payroll taxes. Estimated annual tax payment of $793 million. No small potatoes, folks. As consumers, immigrant households have an estimated buying power or disposable income after taxes of more than $5 billion. Immigrant workers in Minnesota have grown from about 53,000 to 230,000. 18% of small business owners in the United States today are immigrants, and the number is increasing. Projected lifetime earnings of Minnesota immigrants' human capital, $659 billion. Please look at the facts when your constituents, Minnesota residents, come to you for funding. They are asking for a fair use of their money. Now, there's also something else I want to talk about. You alluded to earlier the people who are being recruited in the metro area. Interesting, just yesterday I received my new WHAM newsletter, and I'm going to talk about this in our next show if we have time, because our good friend Polly Mann has written an interesting article called Nuclear Weapons on Hair Trigger Alert, which is really scary. But inside this is this article. And I believe you can find this online, folks. Just look up Women Against Military Madness newsletter for this month. For it says volume 34, number 3, spring to 2016. This article is titled Parallel Paths, the CVE program and United States foreign policy in Somalia. Muslims across the country have been targeted. This is only, I'm reading in part. Muslims across the country have been targeted as a religious community under baseless suspicions. These conditions are being readily exploited and legitimated by programs such as benign-sounding Building Community Resilience, a recent public-private partnership based in Minneapolis, which promises to bring together community-based organizations and local partners including interfaith organizations, nonprofits, and NGOs, and state, county, and local governments. Building Community Resilience is part of a larger program developed by the FBI and the United States Department of Justice. The program is nationally known as Countering Violence Extremism, CVE. This, okay, and then it goes on to say that according to the FBI, one of the key strategies to countering violent extremism is to reach out to communities and build trust and rapport.
That's interesting that you would talk about trust, that they would talk about trust. That's something that is so lacking, and we've met with a couple of the different police chiefs in the St. Cloud area, and that is one thing that Haj and I are talking with them about, saying that we need to build trust between government leaders and new Americans, because they're utilizing services, but sometimes sometimes there's not that trust there.
Right.
And part of that does go back to Black Lives Matter stuff that's happening right in Minneapolis, and you know, so it's not a baseless fear, but the trust has to be brought together somehow. And how can we build trust in our areas when we have speakers like Ron, and I mean, good night.
People who are dividing.
Yes, the trust has to be built. But I feel like, personally for me, everything that Unitecloud does, when a speaker comes in, usually, I mean, Ron is from this area, but sometimes it's from all over America. When a speaker like this comes in, it degrades everything we've worked for. And so instead of a movement looking like this, which this is my first movement I've ever done, so this is maybe normal, it goes like this. So we have some high highs followed by some really low lows. And so the trust is a wavering trust at this point. And how do we build the sustainable trust to the point where even when a speaker like this comes in, he's either ignored or he is, talked to.
He's met with some disapproval instead of welcomed and yes.
Well,
Yes,
this article is pretty telling. To use the words of St. Paul Police Chief Tom Smith, these programs promote engagement between community and law enforcement and have the potential to prevent isolated communities of East African immigrants from becoming breeding grounds for violent extremism and radicalization. This argument reinforces the racism inherent in these programs. By no standards of truth can the Somali people's experience as survivors, as refugees, and as advocates for themselves be deemed as potential catalysts for violent militancy. Such assumptions can only be articulated in a climate ruled by extreme demagoguery and fear, and by no means should this give our government license to implement policies based on such a climate. The plan on policymakers and funders to manipulate the resources available to existing Somali American community organizations and provide impressive sums of money to certain organizations that appear to fit in with their program. But not all members of the Somali community agree with the characterization that these meetings as public. Burhan Muhammad, a young Somali community organizer in Minneapolis, says they were behind closed-door meetings and that the only people invited were nonprofits and leaders. When asked if these leaders represent the whole of the community's interests, Burhan disagreed. They have a track record of not standing up for their people. Indeed, 50 Minnesota-based Muslim organizations condemn the Building Community Resilience and other programs related to CVE. For Bahan and others in the Somali community of the Twin Cities, these programs are counterproductive. They create walls in the community, he says. Indeed, the very idea that the programs provide funds to select organizations rather than making funding for other needs available to all Somalis is a divisive act in itself. Several community organizations such as CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and the ACLU have voiced concerns that CVE will also further stigmatize and marginalize the Somali community. When suspicion becomes policy, it casts a shadow on a vulnerable community, inhibiting independent and traditional means of addressing particular problems. CARE Minnesota Director Jaylani Hussein welcomes efforts to empower youth to make the right decision, but warns that it needs to be a community-based grassroots effort free of intelligence gathering disguised as community outreach. Many organization and community members feel that this endeavor is institutionalization of Islamophobia, with xenophobia, racism, and anti-Islam hatred being espoused by extremists within the nation. Conditions are already ripe for distrust of Somalis in Minnesota, who are a minority in a white majority population. Now exaggerated reports about non-existent recruiters for terrorist organizations legitimize the fear that it is generated through media, thereby granting immunity to experiments in law enforcement techniques such as this one. And it goes on. There's a lot more, but
It depends on which Somali or which Muslim you talk to as to whether or not they are for or against the CVE program. So it is dividing the Muslim community as well.
and that's
which is what we've
unfortunate.
seen. Mm-hmm.
This is from an article titled, "Please Stop with the Christian Persecution Complex, You're Embarrassing the Faith." There's a lot more to read, but I'm going to read the last two paragraphs. And this is where the intellectual laziness or disingenuousness is best displayed. The reason there's no real persecution of Christians in the United States is because Christians are protected by the same document that protects every other belief, non-belief, religion, faith, identity, race, and sexuality. The same document that now allots to everyone the freedoms that we as Christians generally benefited from in times in the past. The Constitution. The Constitution allows us to preach the Bible passionately and uninhibitedly to our heart's content. Nevertheless, it also grants people the right to not have to live according to what the Bible says, and it also protects the secular rights of everyone, regardless of what we consider to be traditional. This is the only tension with which Christians in America must live. We don't have to fear for our lives. We don't have to meet in secrecy for fear of execution. We don't have to hide our faith in the face of dictators that demand their own worship. All we have to do is live in a society where others are free to live their lives beyond the scope and influence of our faith, if they so choose. Yet this is with what so many emotional and teary-eyed Christians call persecution. I call it being spoiled and weak. I call it being ye of little faith. And I call it an embarrassment in a world where people are dying for the faith. So please stop with the Christian persecution complex. No longer being popular is not persecution, it's called growing up. And one thing that I should read, that I should have read in the beginning part of this, the fundamental problem that many Christians suffer from is a misunderstanding of the Great Commission. We have been instructed to go unto all the world and to preach and teach the gospel. We are sent to convince the world that the Bible is the Word of God and that Christ is the Son of God. We were never instructed to use the force of man's legal system to control the lives of people who do not willingly want to abide by the Word of God. And so we have an entire generation of political Christians who feel that their faith should be the foundation of secular laws and that everyone else must abide by their moral code. This was never the Great Commission. This erroneous belief is simultaneously unbiblical and unconstitutional.
unfair.
There's more, but I'm going to let you both inject whatever you want at this point.
I love the part about when he says you're being weak and you're being spoiled. I found that white people, they talk about we're losing our identity as white people, we're losing our,
Right.
they don't want to say we're losing our supremacy. They behave as if they're losing their rights. In fact, they're losing their privileges.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's got them stomping their little feet and, shaking their little fists. How dare you take away my special privileges just so you can have rights?
My pastor has been doing an interesting series. It just wrapped up now, but it's talking about being exiles and who were exiles in the Bible and who are exiles today. And he's specifically talking about refugees that are coming to this area. And he said we should not be surprised as Christians that, and he does call it persecution. I more agree with this, but we are not being persecuted. But he said we're having a harder time being Christians now because not everybody is Christian.
Because it's less convenient.
Yes, it's not as comfortable to be Christian anymore. But he said we should be surprised that it has ever been comfortable because that's not what we were promised. Jesus did not promise us a bunch of money and a comfy couch and a great, wonderful, life that just doesn't have any persecution to it. Just bonbons all day.
Yeah.
That's not what he promised us. And so we shouldn't be surprised that that we're here. I mean, we should be surprised that we weren't here sooner.
Yes.
Well, and the fact is that we're taught in most Christian churches, in one way or another, that if we want to bring people into the fold to become Christians, the best way to do that is to become a friend. There's no better way. Isn't that what he taught? Or
who is
did
it
I
that,
hear a different
no, who is
Christian
it,
message?
Who is it that's that other Christian message? No, who is it that said preach the gospel and if you have to use words?
Oh, that was Francis, St. Francis.
Okay, that is exactly how I try to live my life. But I do use a lot of words, so maybe I'm failing miserably. But but I mean, when I am with Haji, I don't try to convert Haji to Christianity. I tell him why I'm living my truth.
Right.
And then he tells, in fact, that truth aligns with this truth in the Quran. This is why I'm doing this. It's like, oh, really?
Right.
Okay. So we don't come together as this. Unitecloud is not a religious organization.
Right.
We come to Unitecloud because of our faiths, but what leads Unitecloud is humanity.
Right.
And we, on our board, we have Muslims, we have Christians, we have secular humanists, we have atheists. I mean, what unites us is the fact that at the end of the day, we all want our children to be educated and to have a better life than we did, have a more peaceful life than we did. Really, we are all the same when you look at it.
I know, and we always say that, and as soon as we say it internally, without speaking it, we dismiss that. We all have the same needs, we all have the same wants, we all have the same fears. Yeah, but mine are worse, mine are somehow more important.
Right.
I don't know when will this air tomorrow, Chris, or this Thursday? Yeah. Okay, so this event that Ron Bransoner is going to be speaking at is going to be from 6:30 to 9 p.m. at the Falls Ballroom. And
On what date?
on April 29th.
April 29th.
It's Friday rather. Yeah, so this
Friday,
show will
yes.
air before this event, okay? I want to encourage anyone who objects to Islamophobic, racial type message to show up and stand with us. Those of us who will be there in alliance, proudly standing with our Muslim friends.
And the nice thing is that Ron will allow for questions. I've been to AJ Kern's talk, which is another person that is in this speaking circuit of Ron's.
I think.
Yes, well, she's actually in St. Cloud, and she's running against Tom Emmer for the Senate now.
Okay.
But anyway, AJ doesn't take questions, and she won't even take comments. But Ron has more of like a demeanor, like, oh, you don't agree with that, raise your hand type of a thing.
Oh, good.
So, be prepared. Let me give you a suggestion. We've done this two ways in St. Cloud. Before Unitecloud started, there was a demonstration at one of Ron's events. Long story short, the demonstration, I think, was warranted, but really divided our town even more. Not all demonstrations do that. I've been involved in demonstrations. But what was more powerful that I found is to actually go there and ask the questions and talk to Ron face to face and talk to these people that are in the room face to face. Now, I don't want to say that was all sunshine and roses, because even though Ron and I can be amicable to each other, there are people that tell me to drop dead, that I'm stupid, that, I mean, like, there will be people that are so angry coming to this. And this is what I wrote in my letter, right? Let me read the one little part here, because I think this is the most important part that I said. So it's saying to Ron, the people of Little Falls that fear their Muslim neighbors are not coming to your talk to learn anything new, rather they're coming to confirm their fears. What the people of Little Falls should be doing is lining up to meet their neighbors, not you, Ron. They could bring their neighbors some cookies, a plant, some brownies, not a bag full of fear laced with extreme bias. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you what Haji said, because Haji grew up in Kenya, and he, thank you, he talked about watching American movies, and he's like, I thought that when I came to America, that when I moved in, my next door neighbor would bring me a pie, because that's what they do in the movies. He's like, where is my pie? He's like, instead I can't even run a business in this town because white people won't do business with me, and I'm told I'm going to blow up all of St. Cloud, so it's like, that's his question, I think, where's my pie?
I think that's a very, very good question. I really do, and probably a very good place to sort of start bringing this conversation to a close. We've got just a few more minutes. What is your hope for 10 years from now? What do you see if everything goes the way you think it should?
I think we continue to have more diversity. I mean, the thing is that, but remember, Refugee Resettlement Program is a federal program. So the interesting thing about people like Ron and people that are fighting against refugee resettlement is that that's not any of our decisions. That is the federal government's decision. If you have a problem with it, talk to the federal government. But what I'm concerned about and what Unitecloud is concerned about is our communities, our central Minnesota community. And the fact is that we are going to be more diverse, not less diverse. Mm-hmm. So in 10 years from now, it's not just going to be St. Cloud that has major diversity. It's already started here in Little Falls. We have it down in southern Minnesota as well. And I hope, and my kids already see that. My kids have many Muslim Somali friends in their school. And it's not like that's my Muslim friend, it's like that's my friend Abdi, So I would hope that in 10 years we are to the point where Haji is not my Somali American Muslim friend. Haji is just one of my family friends.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That we no longer put labels on human beings.
Right.
I don't tell someone, well, that's my non-Christian friend.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I just am like, that's my friend Catherine. Because she matters as much to me as any of my Christian friends, and she matters more to me than myself, as according to this Bible.
At the We Are One Minnesota program, the last speaker was a Muslim, and I think she was a Somali Muslim, but I'm not sure. But she told a story, maybe a couple stories, and I loved her talk. It's one that you have to watch. If you don't watch anything else, if you don't watch Senator Klobuchar or any of the rest of the speakers, I think you should watch the whole program. But watch this key speaker, this gal that spoke, because she spoke of her friends who have real feelings and have experienced a lot of hurt because of things that beige people are saying to her, and that she and her friend fear that beige people may do to her. The feeling of being uncomfortable in a land that you've come to escape war and terror, many of it created by our own United States government, is a sickening feeling. I have a friend, a Muslim friend from Australia, whose name is Amr Anglasi, and he said recently in a post on Facebook to me, where can I go to get away from this feeling of, my family was terrorized in Iraq. I've had to come to Australia in order to live. My son was kidnapped, and he's really angry, and rightfully so, at United States soldiers and our United States government for making an illegal war and occupation on his country and destroying not only his life but the lives of millions of people in that nation. And to hear a heartfelt story from someone who's been there and has hopes of coming to this great nation to escape persecution and to escape hatred and then experience something the opposite, something similar or worse than what they were experiencing in their homeland. It's just outlandish and not acceptable.
Is
It's a
It's
double
just
insult.
not, it's not America, it's not who we are.
People are looking for a home, they're not just looking for a hiding place.
Right.
They're looking for somewhere they can plant their feet and put down some roots and raise a family, and I think we need to realize that that is a universal desire. That's what everyone wants.
Before we go, we won't have time to go into it, but people should look this article up. It's called 10 Reasons You Should Not Fear Muslims. It's on HuffPost Religion. And it's written by Omar El-Natur. 10 Reasons You Should Not Fear Muslims. And then there's one other thing that a friend of mine alerted me to. Fergus Falls Area College Foundation sponsored speaker who said white men are target of racism. This gal's name is Frances Rice, and she's an African American going around saying that white men are the ones who are targets of racism. And that was actually allowed in the Fergus Falls school system, I believe.
Well, everybody's got something to say and the right to say it.
Well, and I think that what we need to understand is that there is a problem with poverty and with lack of everything right now in this country. In central Minnesota, specifically in St. Cloud, we have twice the poverty rate of regular Minnesota.
And we're 7th at the bottom
Okay.
in health stats and poverty and all the rest of
Okay.
So there's a sense that there's only so much to go around.
Yes.
it. Right.
So
A
it,
fear of not having enough.
yes, it
That's what's
is
driving all
what's the
this.
mentality I'm thinking of? Scarcity mentality.
Scarcity mentality.
Exactly.
And what's happening right now that we need to understand is that there's a fear that we're not going to have enough, and that fear is being put on Muslims and Somalis.
Right.
That fear is also being put, this is a whole other subject, but on our trans and LGBT neighbors.
Right.
You know, it's being put on the already heavily marginalized because they're not thinking about it like that, but that's the truth. So what people have said to me, I know I have to wrap it up, is well, Somali people should speak up for themselves and trans people should speak up for themselves. Okay, but you know what's even greater, and what should be right here with that is white folks speaking up
For
and
them.
speaking out.
Mhm.
Because Haji has experienced, and so have I, if Haji says something in a meeting, it's taken one way. If I say something in a meeting, people look at me, they're like, oh, the white woman's talking and she's getting emotional and we need to listen. And we've seen that in our community. I've seen that in other communities as well. So yes, we do have white privilege, but I'm going to use that white privilege to somebody else's advantage.
Very, very
Yes.
good. Very good. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Please join us next time. We've got a lot to say, as you can tell. And we're so happy to have had Natalie
Thank
with us.
you.
Natalie Ringsmuth.
Thank you,
Unitecloud is the name of her organization. You can look into it, #UniteCloud. Check it out, see if there's a place where you can fit your best talents and gifts with theirs to help out the folks in the area.
Yep, unitecloud.org. If you want to write a guest blog, just send me an email, natalie@unitecloud.org.
You heard it here. Robin, thank you so much. We've enjoyed being here with you, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for
Bye.
watching.
Thanks.